Hello. Good afternoon.
Yes, yes, sir, we can hear
Can you
you.
hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So, good afternoon. Nice to see you after a long time. We are very happy that you agreed to speak to us today. We had a series of yoga related sessions today, starting with a session for the staff and for the patients. So, we are very happy to have you on the academic side today. We also have Dr. Jyotsna, who, of course, you know quite well. We requested her to introduce you since she knows you better than most of us. So go ahead, Jyotsna. Please introduce Dr. Cornelissen to the audience. I think, are you able to unmute yourself? It shows you as muted, Jyotsna.
Okay, yes, yeah. I'm unmuted now. Thank you, Dr. Shivram, and namaste, everyone. It's a, you can say, honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Matthias Cornelissen, who's been my mentor for decades. He's the founder of Indian Psychology Institute, which was established in 2006. And Aurobindo Center for Consciousness Studies, which was founded in 2001.
Recording in progress.
He has been trained as a physician and originally from Holland. And he initially visited India and then finally settled in India in 1976. So initially he was in Delhi, and in 1981 he co-founded Mirambika. It's a research center for integral education based on Aurobindo and Mother's philosophy. Which is in New Delhi, and it's a experimental schooling, you can say, and very famous. Dr. Matthias has been deeply interested in finding ways to introduce some of the psychological knowledge and know-how from the Indian tradition, spiritual tradition, into the academic and mainstream modern psychology. For this purpose, he has organized several conferences, seminars, workshops, gave courses, edited books, written books, published articles on consciousness studies, yoga-based research methodology in Indian psychology. And presently, he teaches integral psychology at Aurobindo International Center of Education in Pondicherry and maintains 2 websites in this area. I would encourage everyone to have a look into it. It's like very rich in insight. And without taking any more time, I would like Dr. Matthias for his talk. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyotsna, and thank you to the department and to Professor Parambali for inviting me. The work your department is doing is extremely important. I think it is very difficult to exaggerate the importance of mental health and psychological sciences at the moment, because really all problems of humanity at the moment in the end are psychological. Technical progress is so much that if we had our act together, we could really solve all the problems that are there. But somehow psychologically, we are not remotely as clever as we are in physics and chemistry. And so there is an enormous disbalance in society between what we know about ourselves, our own psychology and how we work, and what we know about the physical world. So there is a typical situation where we have a lot of power, but not the wisdom to use that power. And so to integrate neuroscience with mental health is necessary and very difficult. And to integrate Western science, Western neuroscience with the yoga tradition is even more needed, but extremely difficult. The reason is that in the beginning of the 19th century, psychology decided to become an objective science, like all the other sciences. And one can seriously doubt whether that was actually a good idea. There is a person called Guzal Dere who wrote an interesting article in which he said that up to 1913, almost all journals of psychology had the word consciousness somewhere in the title. And after 1920, nobody had it anymore, and everybody talked about behavior. Now, the problem is that just the study of behavior leads to an extremely superficial science of our own being, because behavior is really the skin, the outside. And the reason to do it was that ordinary introspection doesn't give reliable knowledge about who we are. People are notoriously poor in judging their own mental state. So science, that psychology wanted to get rid of introspection was perfectly fine. But the problem is that it didn't work. Because if you just look at the outside, you cannot know what goes on inside a person. And everything that matters to people, beauty, love, truth, meaning, knowledge, everything is existing in the end in their consciousness. None of these things that are really important to us are things. None of these things, we have only the word things for those things, but they're not things, they're not objects, they're not on the outside. And people definitely are not objects. Nobody likes to be treated as an object. When we do, we feel somehow not respected for who we are. And so psychology got into a deep problem, and it kind of shifted the responsibility for introspection to the subjects. And the result is that psychology, even when you try to study, say, yoga, you end up trying to do that objectively. And the result of that is that you end up studying what people say about themselves or what other people observe from their outer behavior. But in the end, that is not what yoga is about. And you cannot really understand what happens in human beings if you only rely on what ordinary people already know about themselves. Science, medical science, would not have got anywhere if it had refused to take blood samples and look inside the human body, if it had refused to do chemistry and physics and other things, and had relied entirely on what people know about their own health. It would not have arrived anywhere. The real science of medicine that has caused fantastic progress in this field is due to the study of chemistry, biology, anatomy, which goes beyond what lay people know about themselves. But in the end, psychology hasn't done that. Psychology has done what astronomy would have done if it would have asked people on the street, representative populations, what they see in the evening sky. But if you do that, you will never understand really how the stars and the galaxies work. For that, you need specialists who have very expensive, very rare, exceptional instruments and can look at what's going on in the sky. And then the ordinary people, the other people, have to rely on what these specialists find. But psychology has not done that. And so, in a way, it is just actually a kind of social study of very superficial self-assertions of people about themselves. But it hasn't gone into the depths. Now, the interesting thing is that humanity as a whole has done that very well. And in the yoga tradition, there are actually good techniques, methods of studying what happens inside our consciousness with the same kind of objectivity, with the same kind of precision that you also have in the hard sciences about the physical reality. The problem with it is, part of it is very simple and political and somewhat horrible. It is that this technique was not invented in the West, but it was invented in India. And the people, especially in the beginning of last century, they just didn't take it seriously enough. But this year, India is celebrating its 75th year of its independence, and that the world still prefers the knowledge systems that have originated in Europe over those that have originated elsewhere is simply not acceptable. Yeah? It is somehow completely out of sync. But it is a very big problem. Science has, as a knowledge system, taken over from most other knowledge systems for most of our social life. Yeah, up to say 200 years ago, in all countries, schools were part of religious institutions. In India, part of gurukuls; in other countries, part of the mosque, the Muslim system, or the European churches. They were religious. In modern times, schools are entirely based on science. But science is only good in physics and chemistry and the hard sciences. Science is not remotely as good in psychology. And science tries to be objective. And an educational system that is constantly busy studying children objectively, in some ways, murders them. Children are not objects. They have to be respected as individuals. If you do that, they grow up beautifully. But if you all test them objectively, it means you want to turn them into machines that give proper answers. But the society is not in need of machines that can give proper answers because we have Google for that. So the educational system is based on education, and the system of education that we have is mistaken because it has tried to be objective, while psychology should be a rigorous, progressive, self-critical science of the subjective domain. Now, for science to make that shift is double difficult. Science has the fantastic quality that it is self-critical and that it never takes its findings for final. And because of that, it makes very big progress because it accepts that anything that is found is temporary till something better is found. But science is very conservative and very cautious about the so-called scientific method. And part of that method at the moment is that it wants to be evidence-based. And evidence at the moment is taken as objective evidence. Now, that is a problem because the things that matter for psychology are not in the outside world, they're inside of us. So how, if you want to change the system, science has to keep its critical spirit, its willingness to make progress, to change. But it should accept that the subjective realm can also be studied seriously. Now, and that has to be done by specialists. It is nice to study entire populations, but in the end, that's not good enough because they can only give as much as they can give. In the end, you have to study people who are specialized in studying their own inner nature because it's not easy. One of the things Freud explained very nicely is that what we know about our inside is as little as what we know about the outside world. And about the outside world, normally, as an individual, you know extremely little. Collectively, we have managed to collect a fantastic amount of information. But as an individual, you know very little. About our inner life, also an ordinary person knows very little. But collectively, you can spread the investigations and get much further. Yeah? Now, there is another problem there because almost all the hard sciences believe in a very simple philosophy that assumes that the physical reality is the foundation of everything. And if you take that serious, then everything that happens in our human minds is only the result and the outcome and emerges from processes in the brain. Now, if you assume that, then our entire subjective life is actually only a side effect of chemistry. And so it makes sense to only study the chemistry. But if you do that, you get into a very strange kind of loop because even science in the end exists only in our human minds. Knowledge exists only at the moment that there is a person who turns those bits and bytes that are in a computer into understandable knowledge. knowledge is subjective in the end. All knowledge is. Because you need a subject to have it. And you can try, make confirm to findings with instruments and so on, but in the end it exists in our minds. And everything that matters to us exists in our minds. Even meaning, and definitely values, and definitely feelings. And everything that makes us worth existing. So what we need is a real science of these subjective domains. Now, if you want to develop that, you also need a scientific framework and understanding of the basic nature of reality that allows that. One of the things that has made modern science possible is the brilliant idea that the laws of physics work throughout the universe. And the idea that the whole universe doesn't turn around the Earth, but that the Earth is just one little thing that turns around one small star in one galaxy in the midst of millions and zillions of other ones. That was a brilliant coup. But that has created a kind of uniform field within which science could develop. So science consists of particles and forces between them and so on. And within that framework, the whole of physics has developed with other things. For the psychological domain, the Indian tradition has done the same. It has assumed that everything essentially is something that's created out of consciousness. So everything has as its ultimate stuff, its ultimate reality, Satchitananda, which is a difficult word, but it is in fact very simple. It is Sat, it exists. It is Chit, it is, which means in the end, consciousness, we misunderstand consciousness. Because we think that consciousness is only what we humans have. But that is as primitive as thinking that the Earth is the center of the physical universe. That's simply not how it is. Yeah? Our consciousness is the way it is because we are basically identifying with our brains. And our brains make a map of the world. It is quite justified to think as of our brains as a model, an extremely complex model of many different facets of the actual reality around us. And we identify with that model. And so we think, for example, that things have colors. But they have these colors only because our eyes can perceive that type of colors. If our eyes were different, we wouldn't see things with those colors. And so we live in the model that we make, which many people in the Indian tradition regarded as ignorance. Yeah? There's a kind of second-hand knowledge. Because we make a model of the world, constructed, and we believe that that is the reality. Yeah? Now, if you think of consciousness that is present everywhere, you just conceptually think of it. You could say, what is consciousness in a simple physical thing, in a rock, or even say in an electron? It is the knowledge to be what it is. And fascinatingly, that know-how that even an electron has is almost infinite. Because as far as we humans know, all the laws of physics are in the end one system. And an electron knows the laws of physics that pertain to it to perfection. If an electron behaves differently than a big scientist says, it is the big scientist who has to change. He cannot say, hey, you behave different than the law of nature. That's not right. If the electron behaves in a certain way, physics has to change. However big, however clever, whatever has happened, effects are dominant. Yeah? The thing is that the knowledge of how to be in physical things is perfect. And that is not small. Yeah? We think of physical things as stupid because we compare them with our way of thinking. But physical things are perfect in being themselves. An electron knows how to be an electron to perfection. A rock knows perfectly how to be a rock. It cannot even make an error. Yeah? Now, you start from that. So everything has a consciousness which tells it how to be. Yeah? Now, you get plants. They have a very different consciousness than the physical stuff. Because plants work according to the laws of physics, but in a way they go against the spirit of physics. The physical stuff is into increasing entropy and becomes simpler and simpler. A rock just disintegrates over millions or billions of years. And a plant does just the opposite. It creates something extremely complex out of very simple ingredients for a very short time. That is something absolutely phenomenal. Yeah? And a plant has the amazing thing that the information about how to make that immense complexity is there twice. It is there once in its genetic structure, which is kind of a blueprint for the plant, how to make itself, and it is there once in the plant as a whole. Yeah? Now, this is something that is not there in inanimate nature in any manner. A rock is just completely itself. A plant has a design and makes itself according to that design and according to the circumstances. And every plant is slightly different in that adjustment. In animals, one more layer of complexity is added. Because the animal makes part of his stuff, his brain, into a map of the world. And even a simple animal, say a dog, can say, okay, at the end of this street, there is a very big dog. I don't want to walk in that direction because he will start barking at me. I take another road. Or at the end of that road, there is a friendly lady who will give me cookies. So I go in that direction. Or there is some friendly dogs I can play with, whatever. So he has a map in his mind and he lives within that map. And we humans are one step further. We can change our map we are aware of our maps. And we can change them according to how we think. Yeah, that's what we do in psychology. We know that we think in a certain way, we can change that. But in that, we are still identifying, like the plant and like the rock, is the little matter that we inhabit. Yeah? So there is a continuity in consciousness, right from that rock to our own complexity. And it builds itself up gradually. Now, if you take this as the basic structure of reality, it does not in any way interfere with the whole scientific building of hard science. Because in the physical nature, things are just themselves and they work exactly as science says it works. But it gives us a way of understanding how we work. And then you get something very fascinating. So the Indian tradition can add to modern science, not just these exercises of hatha yoga or of meditation and all that. That's all fine. But then we take only the result, the outcome. What we should take from the Indian tradition is the knowledge system that has made these developments possible. And one is that understanding of the pervasiveness of consciousness. And the other essential part is how to study consciousness. And the central trick of that is that if you want to study consciousness, you have to free it from its content. As Patanjali says, the center of consciousness, of yoga, is to find silence. He says, quieting your mind is the essence of yoga. Now, why would you like to do that? The reason is that if you silence the mind, you stop this chattering of your commentary that your mind all the time gives. You can study consciousness as it is by itself. And strange enough, if you throw the content out of your consciousness, the consciousness actually becomes more clear, more luminous, and definitely very much more delightful. It could have been that if you throw content out of your consciousness, that you would shrink. But that's not how it happens. So if you manage to silence your consciousness, you can go from a state where the mind studies the mind, which is very unreliable. That's what happens in ordinary introspection. Yeah? And the ordinary mind is influenced by our vital nature and all kinds of other things. Instead of that, you go to pure consciousness, and from there you watch the mind. And then suddenly you can look at your own mind in an entirely impartial way. But this is only understandable if you accept some of the basic understanding from the Indian tradition about the nature of reality. And I think that's crucial. In this year, 2022, India is very much celebrating its 75th year of independence. And it is also celebrating the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Aurobindo is not very well known. He is at the moment mainly heralded as one of the people who made Indian independence possible. And no doubt that was important and is important and he was celebrated. But he has contributed three more things that could really help psychology. One is he has formulated in a very technical, precise manner that old Indian understanding of the pervasiveness of consciousness, which makes it possible to make a genuine, sensible, logical synthesis of modern science and the Indian tradition, which is much more difficult on the basis of, say, Buddhism or Advaita Vedanta or so on, because they think in an almost opposite way. But Sri Aurobindo has made a scheme that is really working for both. And the second thing he has developed is a very detailed understanding of human nature, which most of these old traditions actually did not need, because they wanted to find a transcendent. And if you want to find a transcendent, you have to quieten, simplify your nature till it allows you to get out of it. If you do that, afterwards your nature also becomes a little more harmonious, and that's nice and all very good, but it does not fundamentally change. So Aurobindo tried to get a complete, detailed understanding of human nature on the basis of a new way of studying it. And that studying is based on withdrawing your consciousness from its entanglement in its own mind to pure consciousness, but not use that to find a transcendent, but use that to observe what's happening in our inner mind. So instead of looking at humans from the outside, which has its limitations, he tried to look from completely inside, till you find in yourself a place that is impartial. Because you can find in yourself a place that is not ego-bound, that does not feel temporal, that feels eternal, that feels one with everybody else. So there's no egocentric center anymore. And so there's no partiality. There is no need to defend anything. There is an ability to watch what is happening entirely objective. So there are these three ingredients. One is the basic understanding of the basic stuff of reality, something like what physics did when it realized that all these things like gravity, electricity, and so on are working throughout the universe in the same way. Second is a method to study it by going to pure consciousness in silence and using that to study human nature in all its complexity. And then third, the detailed understanding of human nature that followed from. So that combination of these three things is a tremendous contribution that Sri Aurobindo can make to modern psychology. I would actually, Georgia, if you allow me to stop here and take the rest as questions, because it is an enormous field and there is, and it's complicated because we have to try to change the foundations of science without toppling the building. because the hard sciences especially have done fantastic work, and there is absolutely no reason to tinker with that. That works fine. But we have to find another way to deal with psychology. And I think that studying objectively with standard procedures, the things like Hatha Yoga and all that, is somewhat of a sidetrack. It will not lead to a drastic change in our understanding. We have to go deeper. We have to use what the Indian tradition did to find out why asanas work and why meditation works and so on. And that knowledge is available. So that's my proposal.
Thank you, sir. I think that was very insightful. I have a question to maybe start the discussion. What Sri Aurobindo did in terms of sort of bringing out this tradition that you study yourself and then get the knowledge from yourself. The Indians have done it for a long time in the tradition. Why do you think that went away? Is it because of westernization, colonization? Even the Indian schools of today no longer teach how they used to teach in the past. Now it is rote learning and, so why did that change happen?
Colonialism definitely has been harmful in this way. There's no doubt. And it is somehow taking a long time to get that out of the system. Yeah. But there is a more fundamental error behind, which is not India's error. If you go a little further back, the Indo-European culture is actually one culture. Yeah. There is an enormous similarity between Sanskrit and Tamil on one side and Greek and Latin on the other. There are many words are the same. The alphabet is similar. The basic structure of these languages is very, very similar. It must have been one culture at one time. And if you go back to the Rig Veda, it's very difficult to understand. The Rig Veda has been interpreted in very different ways. But you can interpret it in a way where it was very grounded. Some of these slokas from the Rig Veda are really beautiful because the people were solidly there. They didn't think in abstractions. They were terribly happy with language because you could say elephant and tadak, there is an elephant. They enjoyed being here and were fully in it. And then somehow, according to the Indian tradition and most traditions, at least for all the, also in the European tradition, there has always been the idea that we were going downhill. Yeah, most Indian scriptures start with, in earlier times, there were more wise rishis. They are not there anymore. Now we write down what our present rishis have. Then you get the Rig Veda. Yeah, or not write down, but we learn by heart what they have to say. Then people don't understand the Veda anymore, so we write down or compose the Upanishads. Then nobody understands the Upanishads, so we compose the Gita. Then the Gita is too complicated, so we get to the Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah, it goes downhill because people don't get it anymore. Now, if there is a truth to that, our spiritual understanding has gradually diminished. So we could not keep anymore that comprehensive understanding of reality. And then you can think, it seems to look like that the Indo-European culture split. And the Indian side specialized in finding that purity of that transcendence. You can say the intellectual or the spiritual elite focused on how to concentrate the mind so that you can find at least truth in one aspect. And they found an absolute truth. That's shunya of the Buddha or the nirvana, the emptiness, the moksha. These things exist. They're real. Yeah? And you can do it. It is a matter of mental discipline. You throw the junk out and you find that purity. And you're doing. And from Rome, it went to Italy, and from Italy to Germany, from Germany to Chicago, and it became more and more materialistic. And so, in some way, India has specialized on finding that absolute truth It is an absolute truth, but very narrow. And it didn't translate anymore in looking after the physical reality. There are many Indian spiritual traditions that have as an ideal not to be reborn. Yeah? The idea is that being born is a curse. It is only because of karma. Yeah? Now nobody believes that anymore because we believe in progress. But the whole concept of social progress is less than 500 years old. Till about 500 years ago, I don't think anyone in the world had the idea that socially we were making progress. That was not the idea. A good king could keep it okay, and an individual could go up. But the society was basically either static or going downhill. The first book that apparently had the idea that there was a social progress taking place, that history had a direction, was in 1550. And in 1600, there were many. And at the moment, I think all over the world, we have a sense of progress. And we can hardly imagine anymore how it must have lived, how it must have been to live in a static world. In just 200 years ago, most people had no chance to get it better than their parents. The world was basically static. You could get famine, you could get war, you could get an epidemic, things could break down. But how could it improve? Because there were no inventions. Now we are all convinced that in another 10 years, we will either have demolished the world or we will be better off. But the basic sense is one of progress. And I think nobody in his good mind will think that in 20 years the world is as it is now. That's just technically not possible. Either we spoil it or we make progress. But static it cannot be. And that is new. That is only now. So maybe we have to find something to bring these different elements, that highly specialized spiritual knowledge that was there in India, but that also led to a neglect of the ordinary world. Ancient India was rich. The Romans had a law that people could not invest too much in their gold in India because their own economy wouldn't bear it.
Okay.
There were laws against the export of gold because people bought too many things from India. And India was rich. It was described as a wonderful society. But slowly India kind of lost interest and even did not really defend itself to the West. And the West was hyperactive and definitely not very nice and just plundered India. But India allowed it to happen somehow. Yeah? Because that sense of its own value and the sense that it was needed to defend yourself was apparently not strong enough. And so that nationalism comes up now is nice, but there is a very subtle balance that has to happen. Because in the end, we have to come to a harmony. And again, India has the foundation for that harmony. Because it has that understanding of an individual identity that is not ego-based. And that is what we need for the future. Just finding the divine is not good enough. You have to bring that higher knowledge down here so that you can live as an individual in the strength of your individuality without an ego base. And that's something new. That was not really there, except very long back, but in a very vague, generic sense. Now we have to have that in a very concrete, detailed, lived experience kind of sense. And I think that can only be happened by a deep level synthesis of Indian and Western thought. And from my experience, in the little that I know, Aurobindo has made the best foundation for that kind of development. His work is difficult to read, and it is not easy, but then mathematics is also not easy. Physics is not easy, neuroscience isn't easy. So I think we have to put our energy into it and see if we can go deeper than the traditions that at the moment take the limelight. Because they had a different purpose and they came from a different time. What we now need is a solid integration. Just looking with the objective modern science mind at the results of yoga, that will not cut it. That we have to develop it. We have to understand how it works and then take it further. And humanity needs it very, very badly because we are messing up the planet. That's not done. So I would say it's certain. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else wants to ask any question? There are some comments, of course, in the chat box. Yeah, I think Mr. Murthy and Dr. Arti have commented. Anybody has any questions or any clarifications? I think you are muted, Arti. You are not able to unmute yourself? Okay. Can we allow people to unmute themselves? The host has to allow people to unmute themselves. Yeah. Please unmute everybody. Hold on. So I think they have allowed people to unmute themselves. Go ahead, Arti.
Professor, I think it was wonderful hearing you and trying to understand about the nature of consciousness from Sri Aurobindo's perspective. The basic thing that we understand is that science looks at testing things externally. And when we're talking about the nature of consciousness, it's trying to understand oneself from within. However, this dichotomy always remains as to how we can get modern science to understand how to accept the immaculate science of consciousness in the nature itself. And how do you think we can bridge this by making science accept this? Or should we even try doing this, something like that? Or it's not necessary because...
Something is going wrong with the connection. But,
yes. Arti, we lost.
Arti,
okay. I think we lost you. Lost the last part of your question.
Yeah, I said it's very challenging to quantify something which is internal and very experiential. So how do we go ahead as scientists to try quantify or an experiential account of something as immaculate, which could be a science in itself as consciousness and nature?
Yeah. Now, I would ask two questions in return. You talk about quantifying. And the science of the outer world is very much into quantification. But it's quite possible that for the inner sciences, that's not the essence. That's not what is most needed. What might be needed is, for example, comparing we have a kind of inner standard of what is true and false, no? Varsana and so on. The other way is, strange enough, by a kind of direct contagion. And that's not easy to understand in terms of hard neuroscience or hard physics. But we know something in us knows whether someone else has the real experience of or not. There is some kind of a perception that we say, hey, that's right. Even before we know the full logic of why it is. I have been with people who have done really solid yoga in some way. And they had a contagious happiness. You say you cannot share it. I've known a man, and I've spent a lot of time with him. Nobody could enter his room without becoming happy. You could physically not do it. People would come in with all kinds of problems, anger, confusion, whatever. After 10, 15 minutes, they didn't have it anymore. He had that strength in his atmosphere which you couldn't resist. In the 10 years or so that I spent a lot of time with him, I remember only one man who could resist, who would go out as grumpy as he came in. But it was only one man. All the others would leave his room differently. And so consciousness is a strange thing. It is something like electromagnetism. It can influence things at this. Something happens. And so you can,
and that possibly happens from a higher energy to a lower energy. Or
possible. Fine.
From a higher energy source to a lower energy source.
So let's find out. Yeah? Let us see whether other people can learn that same thing. And it's not always a higher or lower. Someone who's very aggressive tends to make other people also aggressive. Yeah, it works in both directions. Yeah. So, but these things can be studied. One of the things I would suggest as a way to get further in this field is to make joint projects, just like you have in technology. Yeah, a university works together with a company, and the company makes something, and the university checks that the way they do it is scientifically makes sense. Yeah. Many people do a PhD in physics and chemistry by working together between a university and an industry. Similarly, you could have a fantastic result if you get people to do PhDs at universities, but who spend their study time not in the university, but with some neighborhood guru. Many Indian families have some wise uncle, far relative, neighborhood person to whom they go for guidance. Some of these will not have much to contribute, but some of them really contribute something. Now, these people should be studied. We tend to go for the big shot, yeah. But there is a lot of publicity, and study these small people. Yeah, what do they contribute? How have they done it? There is a very interesting article by Paranjape. Anand Paranjape had written a very nice article about a guru who was there when he was young, when he was a student, and who was a simple, I think, a railways employee. And his guru had told him to start teaching people. And he gives a very nice account of how the man actually did it. Yeah. Now, I think we can learn a lot from how those people operate. They will not be perfect. It is not high-tech stuff. But it is very interesting to know. And it is a resource for therapists from which we can learn lots of stuff. And each one of them is different, will contribute something else. Yeah? So this kind of projects, you can see where it could lead us. And it doesn't need immediately to be quantified. We can look at processes. We can look at the types of experiences that people actually have. And it can be on a genuinely qualitative basis. Talk to those people. Talk to the people who go to them. See what they have to contribute. And then see if, and on the other hand, from the science side, make sure that things are described properly, that there is detail, that there is accuracy, that nothing is kind of blown up or degraded. So I think these kind of combined projects could kind of take out that inner wisdom that is there, but very spread and very unformulated, because it is not always immediately in that formulated precision. No, that's not how it goes. It ends there, but it doesn't need to start there. So it would be interesting. And there must be other ways also to do things in room. Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Kishore, you wanted to ask something.
Yes, sir. Sir, it was a very insightful presentation. Thank you so much. Sir, my question was, we also have at NIMHANS a Center for Consciousness, and we've been trying to find out the premise that can lead to some research questions. So one question which we were pondering, Dr. Ravindra, who's also there today, was, can we have some kind of hypothesis through which consciousness can be studied? In the sense, if I take you back to Sankhya and Vaisheshika, so where we have Panchavimshati or Chaturvimshatika Tattva. So we have Avyakta, Mahat and Ahankara. So Ahankara is the place, Ahankara is the stage when the differentiation starts, and you have Pancha Tanmatras. In the Tanmatras, we have Shabda Tanmatra, Sparsha Tanmatra, Rupa, Rasa and Gandha Tanmatra. So there is a generic similarity in these Tanmatras, and then only the Indriyas develop. that is, the perception happens. So there is some kind of commonality between Gandha or Prithvi everywhere. Similarly, up, Teja, Vayu, and Akasha. So this we understand. Now, if we are able to understand how the whole dynamics of all these, then maybe we can try to identify the connect between individuals and the larger consciousness. So we strongly believe that human beings or any other organism is in sync with the environment, and there are some dynamic processes that are happening. Yatha Brahmanda tatha Pindanda. So we have certain dynamic processes happening inside the body, and there is some kind of similarity in the environment also. How these interactions happen? Can we have some kind of hypothesis? Because we also know about planetary movements having their effect on the body. So I'm basically an Ayurveda physician. So Ayurveda also talks of how the processes inside are in sync with the processes outside, and that's how we have Rutucharya, which means at each Rutu we are supposed to follow certain food and behavior because the environment has some effect on us. So we have some kind of starting points like this, but some kind of hypothesis wherein we can prove. We know sleep-wake cycle. These are
what would you consider a proof?
So a proof in the sense, to start off, an empirical kind of a question where some dynamics of human beings with outside the human being, if we are able to have a connect, is that possible?
I have two. It's very interesting the detail in which you describe these processes, because that's a very good starting point. There's detailed knowledge there, and it is all reason to find out how it works. In parapsychology, or what they now call it a little differently, there's a lot of research on these kind of things. Yeah, but I would say that also a lot of time has been wasted in just proving that it is a fact. Yeah, that's not always the best way to make progress, because the real skeptics will remain skeptics whatever you do. Yeah, so while the people who have a little bit of their own experience will give you the benefit of the doubt, even if your proof is not fully foolproof. But we could use another methodology. For example, find things that could be learned, and then see if you can make a teaching program, so that those people who have a talent for it can try to develop their capacity for interactions through pure consciousness, through telepathy, through effect on the surrounding, on each other, and what's so. So that's one way of doing it. So you don't take the process as such and assume that you can prove it in anybody, which is probably not the case. But you try to train people and see if they can get better in it. Or you start studying people who know these processes not as theory, but as a fact. Yeah? You try to find people who know these yogic processes not from books, but because they know them. They can handle them. And then study those people. Yeah? So one is trying to make training processes. One is trying to find people who have it under control. Yeah? A big problem in telepathy, for example, is that it is so often incidental. Yeah? I think quite a lot of people have moments that they foresee something that will happen in the future. Almost amongst my students, 1 in 10, 1 in 15, tells that they have dreams in which they see in detail something that will happen shortly after. It is a high number. It's not exceptional. But it cannot exist, so most people don't dare to talk about it. But if you give them the space, many children have it spontaneously. Not always in detail correct, but more than you would think. So one is that. One is you can train. One is you try to find the people who have it by honesty as experience, who can do it on command, which is much rarer. The third one is if you have people who have it together. Yeah, say you have two people who are very much in sync. Yeah, you have sometimes relatives or friends who feel that they very often have a telepathic communication. Yeah, one has a problem and the other knows it and gives him a call, and it is indeed there is a problem. Yeah, try to find these things and then see if the one of the two gives a signal you can measure it in the body of the other person.
Okay.
I think such things are technically feasible. But you have to, first of all, you have to forget that everybody can do it. That's not the case. It is just like you cannot study human capacity to know mathematics by just studying a random section of the population. That doesn't make sense. If you want to study how mathematicians' minds work, you have to get to the top mathematicians. And in this case also, there should be a genuine search of people who cannot just nicely talk about it, but who know it from their own existence and then see what happens differently in their constitution. I think in that way we can do a lot. And if you know these processes in so much detail, there should be people who can also enact them in detail. And then it should be even possible to measure that objectively, because we can measure now so much in the brain that some of that should be visible. If you could probably, for example, telepathy has been proven, I think, to the hilt. Yeah, the proof for that is, I think, totally solid. And you have to be a total fanatic, I think, to deny it. It is possible. It means that something that is consciousness has an effect in the receiver that in the end becomes physical. Yeah? When I talk, my speech is physical. Yeah? But if some idea from you enters my head and then I say it, somewhere there is a transition from pure consciousness or thought or prana or whatever to a physical process. Yeah? If we could, and it is probably a very low energy movement. Yeah? Because if it was a gross energy movement, then there would be a lot of proof that people could shift things physically with their mind. And the proof for that is much, much less. Yeah? Because clearly, if anybody can do it, then it is very few people and on a very small scale. Yeah? The proof for telepathy is solid. The proof for telekinesis or whatever you call it, that you can make things move physically on a distance by pure consciousness, that's very shaky. That's not as solid. Yeah? But telepathy in the end also includes an ability to move something physical. Otherwise, the other person couldn't speak it. He couldn't describe it. So that transition point, it should be possible to measure that if we have that precision of MRIs and all. I don't know. But it is if we figure that out, it would be absolutely fantastic, because then we would find a bridge between pure consciousness and the physical machinery of our brain. And we would get into the whole field of which consciousness influences the physical structure.
Yes, exactly.
We know in great detail how the physical structure influences our consciousness. That's very well known. Yeah? But that doesn't prove that our consciousness comes out of that physical structure. Yeah? We know how a radio works, but a radio doesn't make music, it makes sound. The music part, only a musician can make.
Yes.
So we know only half the story. Yeah? And
Yes.
so far, neurology is into studying radios and amplifiers. But the real stuff cannot as yet not be studied by neuroscience because it is subjective. Yeah?
Thank you,
So
sir.
we have to make that transition somewhere.
Yes.
I think
that's a fascinating field.
I think we'll take the last couple of questions. One, Dr. Manjunath and Dr. Hemant. Yeah, since we are almost at 5 o'clock, we'll probably take the last couple of questions. Dr. Manjunath, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Thank you so much for such a wonderful discussion. I have a very fundamental question in the sense, people who really talk about this consciousness or achieving transcendence and all that. So it so happens that it mostly comes from people of your age. Chronologically you look elderly, but I believe. I also, is it necessary that one has to go through biologically an exposure? There's some amount of chemistry of exposure to stress hormones through life. Somebody has got really exposed to difficult situations and aged a bit. To think about this. It is so common only in this age group. So I feel even if there is an effort to actually induce this, in the younger age group, would it be possible? Is it that common? That's the question.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think it has that much to do with age. It is true that over the years you collect a certain understanding, so your range of experiences becomes more, and your confidence of dealing with it also. But first of all, you have. I can just give a funny quote. My father, who was quite intuitive in many ways, and he said it is so much easier when you get old because your thinking becomes very slow. Right. So to silence your mind gets much easier because there are less thoughts. Yeah. So in that sense, maybe you're right. But I think it is not true. You have young people who have those experiences when they're young.
Yeah. Yeah.
I personally, some of my most beautiful experiences I had when I was 20. And I know families that have where one of the children is kind of a guru to the whole rest of the family, irrespective of the fact that he is the youngest kid.
Yeah.
So I don't think it has in the end to do with age. It is something like we know great writers. Yeah, they always are from 50 years ago or from 100 years ago. And it is just because it takes time before it's famous.
Yeah.
So I don't think it is fully effectual that it has much to do with age. I would say it comes from somewhere else.
Thank you. Because majority seems...
Yes, Hemant will take the last question.
And I very much hope that there is an evolution so that humanity will get more of it because we desperately need it.
Yeah.
Our society is way too much pushed around with people with big egos. We need society to be pushed around with people with a harmonious
in a lighter vein, we also see many people, especially young people, a little impatient with yoga mats on their vehicle, jumping the red signal. So we really think where are we going?
I see many young people with a lot of aspiration and spirit. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not a lost case.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, sir, Mr. Lahiri, you want to say something, sir?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the previous question that was asked. We recently, we all remember people of even your age group and his age group. Few days back in JP Nagar area, we had Shivawala Yogi, who was only 7 years old when he got his so-called Jnana. And long back, we had Shankara.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So I fully agree with what Dr. MC said, that it is so.
Yes, sir. No doubt about it, but the majority seems to be on your side.
I know. He gave the
Yeah, Hemant is one of our young yoga faculty. Yes, Hemant.
Thank you, sir. MC sir, it was really insightful, and I was contemplating on what you have said. So I'm realizing that there is a lot of depth in what you are saying. So I need your guidance, sir.
Just hold on. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, I need your guidance. So I work in the Department of Integrative Medicine, and the direction through which we plan to adopt the lifestyle intervention and the yoga therapy is that we are assessing their gunas and their doshas. So we are assessing the gunas in terms of the sattva, rajas and tamas through the Vedic personality inventory, and doshas using the Ayusoft device. So I seek your guidance in understanding whether this kind of a approach, of understanding the gunas and then trying to bring a balance in those gunas, is it a correct kind of a approach in today's scenario towards treating patients who suffer from different kind of neuropsychiatric disorders? And if yes, then how should be the transition? Like, would you suggest the usual recommended transition from tamas to rajas to sattva, and sattva to gunatita, or is there any other way to bring a balance?
I'm afraid there is no one correct answer in therapy. It really is. We are all somewhere else. and every person has a different problem and a different pace to go with. So you cannot make one general rule or something that will fit everybody, and everybody has to go through certain sequence. So that doesn't be right. Like India as a whole has, over the last 50 years, I think, from Hamas to Rajas, and now we have to read Satya. But individually, you have to see where a person is. So these techniques are good to develop as methods. But then a therapist has to see what that one individual and that individual. Someone may need more stability, just more solidity, so that he can bear with his circumstances. Another person may need more energy to get out of the chaos he's in. And a third person really needs harmony to settle all those different impulses. But I don't think we can make it.
Your voice is not very clear, sir.
Okay. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I was saying that we are all different. So you may have one person who can manage with his life's difficulties by stability, by being calm and strong and bearing with it. Another person will need a good mental understanding so that he can take distance and take it from a separate attitude. The third person just needs more energy to get out of this so that he finds himself. And you have, as a therapist, get a kind of, I would say, intuitive sense. I don't think you can recognize it. Of what that person needs. You may find a few people who really have to go to Donatita's state. But many other people are not doing that. You never get there because that's not where they are. And I don't know, but I think most active therapists will agree that in the end, they have a sense for their client needs. And on that basis, they do what they do. And I'm not too sure that you can recognize that, systematize it and make a nice long list of what you have to do. Okay, more supper needed, more touches. I don't think it could work. Maybe you can give it a try. But
thank you, sir.
My vote will be for trying to train therapists to become more therapeutic.
Thank you, sir. I think
Thank you, sir.
we need to have more interactions with you. Maybe if you are visiting here, both the Center for Consciousness Studies as well as the Integrative Medicine would like to have a little more interaction with you. Yes. So thank you very much, sir. We have enjoyed the talk and the discussion. The discussion probably more than the talk, because we had a kind of a similar lecture by the Dalai Lama around 4 or 5 years back. He was here and spent around 2 hours with us, and he spoke for half an hour, and he took a lot of questions after that. It is absolutely wonderful individual. And like you say, people like him are the people who need to be studied. Because myself and Dr. Gangadhar, we also had the privilege to meet him in Bailakuppe. We spent 40 minutes with him. And at the level of clarity he has and the level of simplicity is unimaginable. It's really so nice. And one question I particularly remember, a lady, one of our staff asked him, she said, you are the Dalai Lama, you are a Nobel Prize winner, and you are so, such a famous person. How do you remain so humble and so smiling? So he said, look, I'll tell you a secret. If I think that I am a big person and I'm that and this, then I'm alone. If I think I am like all of you, I have 7 billion brothers and sisters. You tell me which one is better. So amazing kind of a...
He is a very, very sweet man.
Yes. So I think you have given us a lot of insights. So thank you very much. We can't physically thank you or give you anything this time because
that's not needed at all. I was very happy to have the discussion, and I personally also like the discussion part much better.
Yes.
We learn from the interaction. Is one way.
Thank you. Of course, we will send you a small token of our appreciation by post, but We invite you, sir, whenever you are able to come to Bangalore, please come over. We will have a continuation of this discussion. We are also sending you a copy of a recent book that we published, which tries to look at yoga in different mental health conditions. We have published it from the Indian Psychiatric Society. So we are sending you a copy of that book as well.
That will be wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Namaskar. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.